Hey everybody, I've got a video here for you today, and this is a follow-up of my last video, which I found the information was pretty remarkable, and this is what was found under the front of the Sphinx in an excavation done about 200 years ago by a Captain Caviglia, and it comes from a book that was written in 1837, and where the author just puts in at the end a little section from a book or a volume that was written about 2 decades before. So this is not his writing, the person who wrote this book. He just included what Captain Caviglia found about 2 decades earlier at Cayce in his excavations. And I just want to read here the actual documentation of what was found in front of the Sphinx. A large part of the left paw was uncovered, and the platform of masonry was found to extend beyond it, and in the course of a fortnight Captain Caviglia had removed the sand from the paw and from the outer walls of the temple, in front of which was an altar formed of granite. It is now in the British Museum and has had at the angles projecting stones, which may be supposed to have been called the horns of the altar. The altar yet retains the marks of fire, the effects probably of burnt offerings. And that is just speculation. The opening between the two walls was raised 2 feet above the pavement and formed a sort of window by which it may be supposed that the priests only were admitted into the temple, and near it another lion was found. And there was lions found when excavation was done in the Sphinx temple, because about 2,300 years ago, during the Greco-Roman period, when these people ruled Egypt, they said that this monument was a sphinx, which is the lion's body, a woman's head, and wings. So the Greeks tried to attach their mythology, the Sphinx, to this temple thousands of years after it was built. So when I say it was never a lion, well, that's not entirely, I guess, correct, because a couple thousand years ago, the Greeks tried to attach their mythology to this monument, and they called it a sphinx, and people say, that's ridiculous, this wasn't a dog or a jackal or whatever in its beginning form. It was a lion, it was a sphinx. Well, where are the wings, people? That's almost more ridiculous than some of the other things I have heard about this monument. And it goes on to say this: Captain Caviglia succeeded in laying open the base of the Sphinx and in clearing away the sand in front of it to the extent of more than 100 feet. It is scarcely possible for any person unused to operation of this kind to form an idea of the difficulties which Captain Caviglia had to surmount when working at the depth of the base, for in spite of all of his precautions, the slightest breath of wind or concussion set the surrounding particles of the sand in motion, so that the sloping sides crumbled away and mass after mass tumbled in, till the whole moving surface bore no unapt resemblance to a cascade of water. Even when the sides appeared most firm, if the laborers suspend their work only for an hour, they found that the greater part of their labor had to be renewed. This was particularly the case on the southern side of the right paw, where the people were employed for 7 days without making any sensible advance, because the sand rolled down in one continued and regular torrent as fast as it was removed. And it says he found on the left paw imperfect inscriptions dedicated to Harpocrates, to Mars, and to Hermes. And it says at the distance of about 2 feet to the southward of the right paw, the platform abruptly terminated. It was therefore supposed that the Sphinx was placed upon a pedestal, but by extending the operation in front of the statue, the platform was found to be continued, and the steps were discovered. They were bounded on each side by walls formed of unburnt brick, like those which enclose the ancient cities and temples of Egypt. The inner sides of the walls nearest the steps were lined with stone, and were coated with plaster. The stonework, however, apparently comparatively modern, for upon several of the blocks were the remains of Greek inscriptions. And the Greeks, when they came in here about 2,300 years ago, probably did a few improvements to this. It says, the walls appeared to branch off towards the north and also towards the south, and to form a large enclosure around the Sphinx, but their directions were not ascertained. The steps, about a foot in breadth and about 8 inches in height, were 30 in number. They ended abruptly on the northern side so as to leave a passage between them and the wall. This passage was not examined. And 30 steps. 30 steps. Now, the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx are located at 30 degrees. Is there a connection there? Are they putting number symbolism in the number of steps? That is a slight possibility, I guess. It says, on a stone platform at the top of the steps was a small building which, from its construction and from various inscriptions found near it, seemed to have been a station whence the emperors and other persons of distinction who visited the pyramids could witness the religious ceremonies performed at the altar below. An inscription on the front of it was much worn. Another inscription on the stela was found at P mark in the ground plan. It says another inscription on a stela was found. It was erected at the time of Emperor Nero and bestows on him the epithet which is also found on his coins, with the figure of a crowned serpent, the true symbol of that title. Dr. Young has indeed stated that the symbol was often represented in Egyptian mythology by a winged globe, but the wings were the emblems of Ptah and a globe of fear, and together with the crowned snake, they formed the symbol of the great god. It says the platform above the steps was narrower dimensions, and the abutments had a theatrical appearance. In a few days, another flight of 13 steps was discovered. Now, going back to this diagram that was made supposedly on the spot of what was found in the excavations, and it's pretty detailed in this chapter, so I don't think, he would have any reason to put out BS, and the person who wrote this volume was just including a chapter that was written 2 decades before. He included it in his book, so he is not the author of this. He is just referring to what somebody else wrote about 2 decades before he wrote his volumes. But a doorway, a passage found under here. And remember, this is a century before Edgar Cayce ever put out the Hall of Records hypothesis. So, he wasn't putting out, just fiction based on something he had read, because the Hall of Records story didn't come out for another century. But can we confirm this? Can we confirm, what was found here? Well, let's go back to a video I made maybe 6 months ago. And here is John Anthony West talking to Joe Rogan under the Sphinx. And when they did radar imaging, and here you can see the paws of the Sphinx are right here, and right here. And there is sloping detected by the underground imaging that was done, sloping that perfectly matches what would be detected in something like this if there were stairways and, a sloping towards, the middle of the stairways here. This is exactly what we see here. Exactly between the paws, we see the sloping. I think that confirms what was found here. So I take this for absolute truth. It seems to be confirmed by the radar imaging. Definite sloping right in front of the paws, right in front. I think that is pretty much confirmation of what was found and wrote about. Now I wanted to include this. This is work done by Robert Schoch. This is davidpbillington.net. I will leave the link below. But Robert Schoch has done imaging here also, and here is his diagram with the corner of the pedestal or whatever the Sphinx sits on ending right here, perfectly confirming what is in these at face value. I don't think there is any reason to, disregard this information. And people have put out hypotheses of what this may look like underneath the Sphinx, and that is all great speculation. But Edgar Cayce's Hollow Records story and what was found here at Giza 200 years ago, I find that incredibly interesting. Now, I have had questions on Edgar Cayce and the Hollow Records. What did he actually say? And remember, the excavation work at Giza was done a century before Edgar Cayce first mentioned the Hollow Records under the Sphinx. But it says here, but it was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. And by the way, my thoughts on Edgar Cayce, I thought the story was just a farce. I thought it was ridiculous. And then I read a couple books on Edgar Cayce and I was stunned. So I don't disregard anything he says. That's what I'll say about that. But it says, it was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who popularized the idea of a secret chamber associated with the Sphinx. According to Cayce, there is a Hollow Records with an entrance to be found between the paws of the Sphinx. In answer to the request, give in detail what the sealed room contains, Cayce answered, a record of Atlantis from the beginning of those periods when the spirit took form or began the encasement in the land and the developments of the peoples throughout their sojourn, together with the record of the first destruction and the changes that took place in the land. And he mentions the first destruction, and just like Göbekli Tepe is built around the time period that we know from good data that there was a cataclysmic period on Earth between 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago. And Göbekli Tepe seems to, have that sort of symbolism on their pillars, and that was confirmed about a month ago. So the Sphinx, I believe, was built about 11,750 years ago, give or take a century. And Edgar Cayce, references the first destruction and the changes that took place. And if you saw my Randall Carlson, The Earth Changed 12,000 Years Ago video, you know that there was tremendous changes. So I just find the wording of this pretty damn interesting. And it says, and a record of the meeting of all nations or lands for the activities in the destruction of Atlantis and the building of the Pyramid of Initiation, together with whom, what, and where the opening of the records would come, that are as copies from the sunken Atlantis. For with the change it must rise again. In position this lies, as the sun rises from the waters, as the line of the shadows, or light, falls between the paws of the Sphinx, and there is special shadow play done at 30 degrees. That was set later as a sentinel or guard, and which may not be entered from the connecting chambers from the Sphinx right paw until the time has been fulfilled when the changes must be active in this sphere of man's experience. Then it lies between the Sphinx and the river. And, he talks about it being a guardian, and Anubis, or this great jackal god, being the guardian, is so perfect. And just doing a lot of reading, people feared these little, or not little, but they're actual sized dogs, because they saw them in cemeteries digging up freshly buried bodies and literally eating their intestines out. So there was a great fear of whatever species of dog this was. Now imagine approaching ancient Giza at night, a long, long time ago, and you have a sacred necropolis, and in front of it, in the moonlight, in the starlight, appears an enormous version of this dog that in actual size you are afraid of. And here is one, this jackal god, 5-6 stories tall, the fear that this must invoked in these people, I just find that just amazing when you really think about it, and the purpose of Anubis guarding the sacred necropolis. I find that incredible. But this is what Edgar Cayce, and I will leave this link below. I don't have time to get into this a lot here, but as far as what was found, I just did a little research, and based on what we know from imaging, it appears to be legit. There was a doorway, there was 30 stairs, there was another small set of stairs going down into the temple of Tep-2F, which is translated as Anubis upon his hill. Just thought I'd make a follow-up. This appears to be a very interesting find, and I will be talking to you very soon. Hope you thought this was interesting. You all have a very nice day.